So if there's any mess ups in the slides, it's the Mac's fault. Thank you for the last slot, Matt. Really appreciated. We're every presenter once. You guys have me in the way of beers and a free sidekick, so I'm ultra popular right now. But I snagged 3 McHale hats earlier. Got 3 questions coming up, so hopefully if you pay attention, you may be able to grab one of those. Matt is going to be my beautiful assistant handing them out when we get there. I'm glad it's such a big screen because I've got some data-heavy analysis on here, and we're going to go quite quick because it's 20 minutes, but we're going to look at this in more detail slower on an McHale webinar later in April. So if this is blowing your mind, especially as you're just drained from a day worth of info, we will cover it again and we'll go slower next time. So I wanted to talk about clients and I wanted to look at how they're handling 6 gigahertz because I work for a client vendor. All the great presentations we've seen about 6 gigahertz is coming out of the American AP vendors. I'm a UK guy selling clients, so I want to see how the clients can handle it. So that's what this was about. So yay for 6 gigahertz, right? It's the future. You heard David say it earlier. You know, we're moving into a 6 gigahertz era, and there's nothing to go wrong, right? Well, this is what we have, thanks to Wireless Pros for their awesome graph. This is what we had currently, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz channel availability, and then they bring in 6 gigahertz and add a lot more channels. So yeah, great, denser, wider, faster, all those things. Except we're not in the US, we are in Ofcom, and some of the designs we're seeing are really aimed at the US market. So how does that affect our clients when we can only do this much, which is still great. We've gone from 28 channels to 52. It's a massive leap forward and I'm very grateful. But I wanted to see how they work here, how 6 gigahertz works in the UK. And that is what this is all about. So we've had people talking about roaming already. So this could be a bit of repetition, but repetition helps you take it in. I think of clients trying to roam as speed dating. They've got all these tables to sit at and see if the access point on the other side of it is someone they want to make a connection with. And so the client goes on to channel 1 and now says hello, asks what it's looking for, is ultimate SSID here, says a bit about itself, and then takes that data, knowing who sat at that table and whether it wants to make a connection. But then it has to go to another channel and do the same process again. Very manual. So now I'm on channel 36 and I'm doing it. Again, having this conversation, trying to find out about the other person, trying to see if I like them. Then I've got it again, this time in DFS, which thankfully we don't have in 6 gigahertz, but 5 gigahertz plays a big role in roaming with 6 gigahertz, as we'll see. So over there, I've got to be polite. I've got to let them speak first, not just blow out what I'm interested in. And then when I hear there's someone there, I can start my patter. And the clients have to do this from 1 to all the channels, depending on their algorithms and how smart they are. So to try and cut that down, we have several strategies for speeding up or reducing that number of tables it has to sit at. And kind of there's some that are really bubbling to the top and being quite successful to help us with 6 gigahertz and the amount of channels we've got there. The old one, the first one is an old one. We've had it for a while, 11K. We've heard people talk about it already today. So basically, the client gets to connect to the AP and instantly says to it, hey, tell me about the tables I'm actually going to care about in this room, because I don't want to go talk to everybody. That's too many. I want to talk to the hot ones or whatever, you know, however shallow that client is. So in the AP will reply going, yeah, I've got you, don't worry. Go to these tables. That's what you care about. So that's great. And as a sidebar to 6 gigahertz, please turn this on. It makes client roaming so much better. It's very unintrusive. If you turn it on and the client can't do 11K, it normally will tolerate it being on because it really doesn't change much in the frame format until you actually want a neighbor report. So if you can't turn on 11K, if you found a reason, grab me later. I'd love to hear it because 11K should really be on in every network now. And I'd love to hear if there's a genuine reason why you can't turn it on. So then we've got a new one, but an old one, reduced neighbor reports. Sounds the same as 11K, neighbor reports twice. It's not, it's part of 11V, but very similar to neighbor reports in 11K. It's giving you information about where you can go, but it's unsolicited. So instead of the client asking for it, it's just contained in beacons and probes in 5 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, and in 6 gigahertz for the client to find out without having to ask for it. So basically now the APs, when we join them, they're automatically giving us this information. We don't have to go asking for it. And this is proving to be very, very useful in fast roaming for 6 gigahertz. It's probably the #1 thing that's really helping out the situation. And the last one is the preferred scanning channels. So someone saw this train wreck coming down the line, was like, whoa, that's a lot of channels. That's going to basically mean we roam once every 10 seconds. That's really not good if you're moving down a corridor on a voice call. So they designated particular channels as primaries that we should focus on scanning when we go into 6 gigahertz to look for service. But this is where the FCC and the whole spectrum comes in. They're placed every 4 channels. So if you're not doing 80 megahertz bonded, then some of your channels are not going to contain a PSC and effectively be invisible to a client that purely relies on that. So PSC is useful, we'll see that in the data, but it is also, you know, I wanted to understand how is that going to work in the UK or Europe where we only have 20, half the available channels, and we won't probably be doing 80 very often at all. So I built this matrix of things I wanted to see. I'm not testing the different authentication types. I'm not testing going between WPA2 and 3 and whether that's a successful transition. I'm looking at discovery. How can we discover the clients? So I took a 5 gigahertz benchmark so we can see what normal looks like. And then I created some 6 gigahertz only SSIDs. So all radios are off apart from 6 gigahertz. Greenfield, the AP, only had 6 gigahertz on. Then I did an SSID that was on both bands, and then I did an SSID that's different on both bands. So both radios up, the 5 and the 6, but the SSID is different on them. And then I did catch 2.4, but we won't do the graphs for that here because we just don't have time for it. So to understand the graphs you're about to see, I need to kind of walk you through them. And this is where the hats come in, so everybody can wake up now. So this is how we visualize transmission. I did the testing with a G711 voice conversation running between 2 clients. That means I'm sending an audio frame every 20 milliseconds, and that gives me 5 audio frames per 100 milliseconds. And so, if I can make the clicker work, do we really have to point up? Oh man, why is, oh. So over here, I don't know if you guys can see it, I can control it, 5. So this black line nicely goes across at 5 because it's a resolution of 100 milliseconds and we want 5 frames every 100. So when it's at 5, we're transmitting audio, a good audio call. But you see some great big drops in the transmission there. For the first hat, what do people think the client was doing in those gaps where it had to reduce its audio TX because it was doing something else? It was probing. I don't know who gets the hat there. I mean, Matt might just need to throw it because I heard scanning, I heard probing. Probing was the word I was looking for. If you want to go claim it from Matt later, or maybe he can find us another 30 odd to give out for the people who got it. So pink bars, where the client probed, we will see pink bars in these graphs. And that says, yes, okay, we see that the drop in the TX was because it was probing. Now you might say, that's a big drop in TX for only a little bit of probing, but I'm using the sidekick to capture 3 channels because I've got 3 APs on 3 channels. So if I had a sidekick that captured every single channel, Miko, then I would see pink through that whole drop in transmission, but I don't because I've got a 4-channel sidekick, not an 8 or 52 one, please, Miko. I don't mind driving around with it. It's fine if it's big. So in order for a client to go probing on another channel, what does it have to do on its current channel for the next hat? Stop. Yes, a bit more specific. Someone shouted something? Power save, yeah, we'll go with that. Who said power save? Well done. Dobius talked about it earlier. We have to go to sleep. If we want to go off channel, but we're expecting audio data every 20 milliseconds, we have to say, I'm going to sleep to my access point so we can go off and do other things. And so the red dots represent sleeping. It's not actually, it looks like a red line. It's just because there was so many messages where it was going to sleep because it was scanning so many channels. So the red line says, yes, the drop is because it's off network, off channel scanning somewhere else. Oh, I ruined the last cap. Maybe that can go out to people for the first one. So after we've done all of that, we hope to see a roam, and that's what the green bar represents in these graphs. Basically, the client decided to roam to another access point, and the green bar represents the reassociation response in that pairing. So that's the graphs. I know, data heavy, I told you. So this is what 5 gigahertz looked like at 20 megahertz wide. All of my tests were done in 5 gigahertz at 20 megahertz wide because I'm a big believer in not doing bonded channels in 5 gigahertz. Come and fight me later. The iPhone's always a black transmission line, and the Pixel, which I use, is always kind of a bluey, light bluey transmission line. So the 2 graphs are the same, just the blue is the TX for the Pixel, and the black line is the TX for the iPhone. Now, I want to call out some things on this, but this really is horrible, isn't it? So what we notice from the iPhone is that 5 line, when it's in good coverage, is very, oh, I'm drunk with this thing, is very, very smooth. So when the iPhone is transmitting in good coverage, it's got a very, very smooth audio line going out. The data's going every 5 frames every 100. Whereas if we look at the Pixel, it's very, very bouncy. It goes up and down, up and down. So it's not really transmitting very smooth audio when it is in good coverage. However, if we look at the iPhone, where it breaks, that's a massive drop. That's a massive interruption of TX and could well result in choppy audio because we're running out of audio buffer because it's dropping and scanning so much. Whereas when we look at the Android, we see a very small drop, and there are some red dots there. You can just see them. So it is doing some sleeping, but the Android seems to have a much better algorithm for targeting where it wants to go. It goes and scans 3 or 4 channels and then decides it wants to roam. It looks like the iPhone might be scanning almost every channel it can with that massive drop. So they're both good at something and are both limited at others. But that's what normal looks like. So what does the iPhone in 6 gigahertz only, 20 megahertz, and even without 11K, because I want it to make life really bad for it. So I am capturing the associations, because you can see up the top there that I do get a green bar. This is when I turned the radio on at the start and it associated for the first time. But as I moved around, it did sleeping, so it was looking for something better to do. It did some probing, some pink bars, but it didn't do a single roam. That iPhone stuck to that AP at 20 megahertz on 6 gigahertz the whole time. It did not try and go to any other 6 gigahertz APs that had better service. Turn on 11K, it's a bit better. We're seeing more probing now at 6 gigahertz, we're seeing more pink bars. So now it is knowing there's something in 6 gigahertz to look for. So it is probing at 6 gigahertz, but it still doesn't roam. So 20 megahertz in greenfield 6 gigahertz radios only is probably not going to work. What if we do dual band, where the same SSID is available on 5 and 6? That's fine, that's normal. Suddenly we see, yeah, it sleeps, yeah, it drops, we see it probe and it roams. Every time it looks for service, the iPhone goes. So that's good news. We've not got the spectrum here that we have in the US, but we can still do 20 megahertz channels in 6 gigahertz if you need it. You just need to make sure the 5 gigahertz radio is on. What if you don't want the same SSID, because you don't want to compromise security in 6 gigahertz by having to have WPA3 transmission mode because it's got to be in 5 gigahertz? Well, if we split the SSIDs, so they're separate, so that there's a 5 and a 6, but they're different SSIDs, then what happens? Well, the iPhone is still quite happy. As long as there's a 5 gigahertz radio up, the beacons in 5 will advertise a different SSID in 6. Even though there's different bands and different SSIDs, it will advertise it. And so the iPhone, as we can see, is relying on 5 to find 6. So what about the Android? So much a similar story. It didn't do anything, it just stuck. In 20 megahertz, without 11K, it just stuck. In fact, this one, I don't see any probing at all. It might have probed off channel, but I don't think it did, because I don't see any sleeping, and it can't probe off channel without sleeping. So the Android went very, very sticky at 20 megahertz, 6 gigahertz only. Turned on 11K, and it got no better. Even though 11K is now on, and it knows when it joined its AP, there are other 6 gigahertz APs to go to. It didn't try and do anything at all. And I ran these tests multiple times to make sure I wasn't seeing a random freak accident or an outlier. This is what I found consistently happening. But you turn on 5 gigahertz and we get some action. Suddenly, the device actually does do some sleeping, does do some probing. We get a nice roam in the middle there, but then it sleeps, probes, and disappears at the end. So the Android chose to go to 5 gigahertz. It chose to leave 6 and go to 5 gigahertz for service. The call continued, everything was fine. I just wasn't capturing there because Miko's not maybe my golden sidekick yet. But as long as it's happy, I don't care if it goes to 5 gigahertz, that's fine. But interestingly that it went there and the iPhone chose not to. And then what about if I trap it in 6 gigahertz? So I configure it on a 6 gigahertz only SSID, but I give it a 5 gigahertz one to look at. Then it stays and it roams normally. So again, 20 megahertz with a Pixel, absolutely fine, so long as you're doing, as long as you've got the 5 gigahertz radio up. So 40s, what's the iPhone doing? Again, iPhone doesn't really like 40 megahertz with 11K off. It does some scanning, but it only chooses to roam once. It should have roamed more. I walked the same path every time for every test. So if it was roaming in 5 gigahertz or it's roaming with 11K on, it should be roaming without it, but it's not. So 11K, 40 megahertz is not really good. But you turn 11K, and suddenly the iPhone doesn't even need the 5 gigahertz radio now. The iPhone's like, oh, great, okay, I've got 11K on. I know the tables at the speed dating I want to go to. And so actually it starts becoming a very happy roaming client, sleeping, probing, roaming. And then again, if it was good without 5, it's going to be good with 5. And that was consistent. When you turn on the 5 radio, it acts like it does in 20. It's fine. The Android, interestingly, we got one roam in 40 megahertz with 11K off. So things must got really bad for it then. But we got one roam out of it. But very interestingly, this is going to come up later. So but once I turn 11K on, it's fine. Again, it's happy, it knows where the APs are, so it now starts roaming like a normal client, and this is 6 gigahertz only. There is no 5 gigahertz radio on to help it. So if you do need a good 6 gigahertz greenfield, which I think is going to be very rare, 40 megs working if 11K is on for both clients. And then the dual band one, again, Android decided to go up to 5 gigahertz again. That's fine, as long as it's happy, as long as it's maintaining the phone call, I don't care where it goes. But yeah, it chose to leave where the iPhone chose to stay. And then if we trap it, the same. You notice it's roaming less than the iPhone. The iPhone, we tend to see about 5 roams in my test. The Android's about 3 because, as we heard earlier, the Android's happy with lower signal strength than the iPhone is. So lastly, well, not lastly, there's some more slides, but let's look at 80. So this should be fine because now we have the PSC channels, and we can see actually, even with 11K off, with only 6 gigahertz radio up, the iPhone is quite happy. It is doing sleeping, it is probing, and it is finding something to roam to. But for the eagle-eyed out there who really know these graphs now, you're like, what the hell happened to the transmission line? That looks horrendous. The answer is I don't know. I've dug into the data. It's not sleeping. We see that during these troughs, there's not many red dots, if any, so it's not going probing somewhere else. And if I look at the data, the sequence number has a massive gap in it. So the iPhone was transmitting audio somewhere, just I wasn't capturing it. Was it OFDMA, which is harder to capture? Or was it something else going on? I don't know. But I think what we can see from the roaming is that it's happy, it's moving well without 11K in 6 gigahertz if you're doing 80 because it's got those PSC channels. But those PSCs don't help when we're not doing 80. Turn on 11K, much the same picture, still roaming, still happy, but still got those weird drops. And then, of course, the next two are going to be fine because it's been fine all the way up from 20. As long as you've got the 5 gigahertz radio on, any width works. The Android and 80, similar. It's got the PSC channels now, so it's quite happy. It's roaming away in 80 megahertz in 6 gigahertz only without 11K. So if you have a client that can't do 11K for some reason and you want it to be 6 gigahertz, then 80 might be what you have to do. Interestingly, right at the end there, if I can make this gadget work, the Android also has a drop. And we'll see in these graphs there's a few drops in the Android. So it's not iPhone only. Something's happening in 80 megahertz, which is stopping me capture the data because I'm seeing a drop, but it's not really the data stopping. It's me not seeing it in my captures. So I don't know what that is. Maybe I'll have an answer by the webinar. Probably not. Now, this was the outliers to out. I repeated this test a lot because I couldn't believe it. When I had 11K on in 6 gigahertz only, the Android never roamed. 80 megahertz, it just stuck. Now, in 6 gigahertz, we can increase our power levels as we increase our bandwidth. So I thought, well, did it get a better service? But it can't have because it roamed without 11K on and it roamed with 5 gigahertz on. But I don't know what there was. But I repeated the test 4 times and it did every time. So maybe it's one of those features Matt was telling us comes up in software sometime. Don't know. Interestingly, it stayed in 6 gigahertz. When it had the ability to go to 5 with the dual band, it stayed in 6 gigahertz because it's now 80 megahertz wide. Those roaming algorithms preferring wider because, it stayed in 6 gigahertz. So I just wanted to compare the common scenarios you're going to deploy. So you're going to deploy an SSID on both 5 and 6, or maybe you're going to split them across 5 and 6, but very few of you are going to deploy 6 gigahertz only greenfield. So I wanted to look at 20, 40, 80 in the most common deployment scenario. So dual band, 20, 40, 80 for the iPhone, it's fine. As long as the 5 gigahertz radio up, doesn't matter which bandwidth you use. Here in UK and Europe, where we've got less data, go 20, the phones are going to be fine. We don't need those PSCs. Same with the Android. It does choose to go to 5 gigahertz every now and again, but in general, it's roaming and it's happy and it's healthy. So as long as the 5 gigahertz radio is up, it is happy. And then pretty much the same story when we go to the split band, it all looks good. And same with Android. And it stays, because we've trapped it in 6, it can't go to 5, it doesn't have the credentials for it, it stays, and it roams normally.
Andrew, on the On the 6 gigahertz.
Who would dare ask a question when I'm over time? Dan Jones.
Cheers. When you did the 40, was that 40 just in 6 gigahertz? Was 5 gigahertz still at 20?
5 was 20 the whole way through. So even when we went at 80 megahertz and 6 gigahertz, I kept 5 at 20 because, as you know, Dan, I don't like channel bonding in 5. It's for hotels and people who don't care about roaming.
Since we're asking questions.
Oh, my word.
When you had both 5 and 6 on,
Yeah.
so you're using the R&R, did you also have K on 6?
No, K was off for everything apart from the 6 gigahertz only test.
So the next test we need is with 5 and 6, leveraging the R&R, but also seeing if there's an improvement, also using K and 6 at the same time.
Agreed. I toiled with that for a long time, Dave. I'm like, do I turn that on because that's real life? But I was like, no, I want to control my variables, and I'll do one with K on, and that was the 6 gigahertz only greenfield. And then I used R&R and PSEs and the others. But I'll do the test for you in Q5. Thank you. So the conclusion, so you guys can get to winning psychic and the beer and everything. So greenfield 6 gigahertz at 20 megahertz wide is going to be a bad experience. You're just not going to be able to do it. I don't think in any country. Even when you go to 40 megahertz, it's not really great unless you enable 11K. But as long as the 5 gigahertz radio is up, then we can do 20 in 6 gigahertz. So even though we've got less spectrum, we can now have another 22 channels or whatever it is in 6 gigahertz if we want it for density and to reduce condension, because 20 works fine as long as there is another radio alongside it to help guide the clients. And I think clients are going to get better at 6 gigahertz roaming. They just don't know how to do it yet. There's not enough data points. So they're still using their 5 mechanism to find 6. And then the thing I really wanted to find out from this is, are we going to have roaming expanded, scan times expanded, because we've almost doubled the number of channels? And the answer is no. There's a small increment in how long it takes to now find an AP, but it's not double, which is what I would fearful it would be once we got all this spectrum. Thank you very much.